Jean stood in the small kitchen, looking at the 2 cups of tea. The steam rose into the still air. It was the last morning. The last time this kitchen would feel like home. Outside the window, the sky was a dull gray, the same color it had been for most of his life. It was not an angry sky, just a tired one. He carried the cups into the main room. His wife, Sumin, was sitting on the floor with their daughter, Hannah. They were looking at a picture book of Earth. Not the Earth outside their window, but the Earth from before. The one with bright blue skies and deep green forests. "The tea is ready," Jean said. His voice was soft. Sumin looked up. She gave him a small smile. It was a smile that held 8 years of marriage, and all the hope and fear of tomorrow. Hannah, their 8-year-old daughter, did not look up. She was tracing the shape of a whale with her small finger. This was their last hour in the apartment. The last hour on Earth. The thought was too big to hold in his mind. So he focused on the small things. The chip in the blue teacup. The way the light from the lamp fell on Sumin's black hair. The sound of Hannah's quiet breathing. Their apartment was in what was left of Seoul. The city was not ruined, just worn out. The energy was low. The world was not ending, but it was fading. The seas were higher. The storms were stronger. The future on Earth was a narrow path, getting smaller every year. So humanity had built a ship. Just one. It was called the Odyssey. It was the greatest thing humans had ever made. And Jean had helped design its heart. The jump drive. An engine that could fold space, that could fly faster than light. It was a leap into the unknown. A desperate prayer for a new beginning. The mission was to Proxima Centauri. A star with a planet that might be a new home. The journey would take decades, even with the jump drive. It was a one-way trip. Everyone on board knew they would never see Earth again. They were not explorers. They were seeds, thrown into the cosmic wind. Jean sat down with his family. He sipped his tea. It was bitter. "Are you scared, Appa?" Hannah asked, finally looking up from her book. Her eyes were large and serious. Jean put down his cup. He thought about lying. But today, of all days, required truth. "Yes, Hannah. I am a little scared." "I'm not," she said, though her small shoulders were tense. "I get to see a new star." Sumin reached out and squeezed Hannah's hand. "We will see it together." The clock on the wall chimed softly. It was time. They stood up. There were no suitcases. Everything they were taking was already on the ship. The only thing they carried was themselves. The ride to the launch facility was quiet. They looked out the window of the fast train at the passing world. The quiet cities, the shielded farms, the vast sea walls holding back the ocean. It was a world trying very hard to survive. The facility was a huge, clean place full of light and noise. Other families were there, saying their own quiet goodbyes. There were no loud celebrations. On screens around the world, people were watching. This was a global moment, but it felt like a private funeral. The woman in a blue uniform approached them. "Engineer Jean." "Dr. Zollman." "It is time to board." Jean nodded. He knelt down in front of Hannah. He looked at her face, memorizing every detail. "You must be very brave on the ship. Listen to your mother." Hannah threw her arms around his neck. "I will, Appa. I promise." He held her tightly. Then he stood and faced Sumin. No words passed between them. They had said everything in the quiet of their apartment. He took her hand, and together, with Hannah between them, they walked towards the gateway to the Odyssey. The ship was immense. It was not sleek and shiny like in old movies. It was solid and practical, built for a long, hard journey. Its hull was a dark metal, studded with sensors and antennae. At its back was the ring of the jump drive, a complex circle of machinery that looked like a giant, sleeping metal flower. Inside, the corridors were clean and white. The air smelled of recycled oxygen and new plastic. They were shown to their room. It was small. 3 narrow beds, a small table, and a screen on the wall. It was smaller than their bathroom back home. This was their new home. Jean had to go to the bridge. As the lead engineer, he was needed for the final checks. Sumin had to go to the biodome, the Ark, where she was in charge of the thousands of plant seeds, bacteria, and small animal embryos they were carrying. It was a piece of Earth, packed carefully into a metal box. A young crew member, a friendly woman named Gae, offered to take Hannah to the children's common area. Hannah looked at her parents for permission. Sumin nodded, her face pale but calm. "Be good," Jean said, and then they parted. The small family, the three of them against the universe, split up for their duties. On the bridge, Jean was surrounded by screens and data. His team, including a sharp young technician named Tay, reported one system after another as ready. Life support green. Navigation green. Jump drive capacitors at 100%. Jin's fingers flew over his console, confirming the readings. His heart was a drum in his chest. He had designed this. He had run 10,000 simulations. But this was real. The lives of everyone on board, the hope of everyone back on Earth, depended on the machine he had helped create. The captain's voice came over the ship-wide comm. It was a calm, steady voice. "All crew prepare for launch. Strap in. This is it." Jean sat in his chair and fastened the harness. On his personal screen, he pulled up a view from the children's common area. He saw Hannah, sitting with a few other children, her eyes wide as she looked at a screen showing the outside. He then switched to a view of the Arkansas. He saw Sumin, strapped into a chair amidst the quiet green of the plants. Her hands clenched on the armrests. A deep rumble started to build. It was a vibration that came from the very bones of the ship. The view on the main screen showed the launch gate opening. The blackness of space was ahead. Launch in 10-9. Jean held his breath. 8-7. He thought of the gray sky outside his apartment. 6-5. He thought of Sumin's smile. 4-3. He thought of Hannah's question. "Are you scared?" 2-1. Ignition. A giant, invisible hand pushed him back into his seat. The Odyssey moved. It was not fast at first. Then it picked up speed, rising from the Earth on a pillar of brilliant fire. On the screen, the Earth began to shrink. The dull gray planet, their tired home, became a beautiful blue and white marble again, seen from a distance. They reached orbit. The thrust eased. They were weightless. "Orbit achieved," the pilot said. "All systems nominal. Preparing for the jump." This was it. The moment. The jump drive began to power up. The ring at the back of the ship started to glow with a strange purple light. The energy hummed through the ship, a sound you could feel in your teeth. "Jump coordinates locked," Jean reported, his voice tight. "Drive is ready." The captain's voice was quiet. "Take us out, Mr. Jean." Jean pressed the command sequence. The universe tore open. It was not a smooth transition. It was a violent, wrenching pull. The light on the screens stretched into impossible lines. The sound was a roar that blocked out all other noise. Jean felt his body being pulled in every direction at once. He clenched his jaw, his eyes fixed on the status readouts for the drive. The power levels were climbing far beyond what he had predicted. "The field is unstable," Tay shouted over the noise. "Divert power from non-essential systems." Jean yelled back, his hands moving frantically. "Try to stabilize the harmonics." Alarms started to blare. Red lights flashed across the bridge. The ship was shaking itself apart. "We're losing containment," Tay screamed. Jean looked at his screen. The energy surge was catastrophic. He had one last thought. Not about the ship or the mission or humanity. He thought of Sumin and Hannah, somewhere in the shaking, screaming metal tube with him. Then, a wave of pure white energy flooded the ship from the drive core. It washed over the bridge, through the corridors, through the Arkansas. Every screen went black. Every light went out. The roaring stopped, replaced by an absolute, terrifying silence. The shaking ceased, leaving only the faint, wrong sensation of drifting. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim, red glow. Jean coughed, pulling himself up in his harness. The bridge was a mess of floating debris. "Report!" the captain croaked, and no one answered. All the systems were dead. Jean looked at his own dark console. He looked at the main viewer. It was not the familiar starfield of near-Earth space. It was not the pinpoint light of Proxima Centauri. It was nothing. A vast, empty, starless black. Humanity had jumped, and now they were lost. The silence was the first thing Jean noticed. It was a heavy, thick silence that pressed in on the ears after the terrible roar of the jump. The second thing was the darkness. The main lights were dead. Only the weak, blood-red glow of the emergency strips lit the bridge. They cast long, dancing shadows as small objects. Data pads, tools, a drinking bulb, drifted lazily in the zero gravity. A groan came from his right. Tay was stirring in his chair, his harness the only thing keeping him from floating away. What happened? The young technician mumbled, his voice rough. Did we jump? Jean unclipped his own harness, his movements slow and careful. His body ached as if he had been beaten. We jumped, he confirmed, his voice low. But to where? He pushed off gently towards his main console. The screen was black. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He tried a manual reboot sequence. Still nothing. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. Power is gone, Jean said, more to himself than to anyone else. Complete system failure. Across the bridge, the captain was already on the ship-wide comms, her voice crackling with static. All hands, report. This is the captain. All sections, report your status. The only answer was more static. The comms were dead. The next few hours were a blur of controlled panic. By rerouting emergency power from a backup battery, they got a few primary consoles online. The news was not good. The jump drive was not just offline. It was critically damaged. Jin's life's work was a scorched and fused ring of metal. The main reactor had shut down to prevent a meltdown, and they couldn't get it to restart. They were running on batteries, and those were draining fast. Life support was on its last legs. The air was getting stale, the carbon dioxide filters were failing. The ship was cold, the temperature slowly dropping towards the freezing point of water. The captain organized work parties. Jean led a team to the engineering bay, floating through the dark, silent corridors. The ship felt like a ghost. Crew members they passed had wide, frightened eyes. They asked him what had happened, where they were. He had no answers for them. In engineering, the scene was worse. Panels were blown from the walls, exposing burnt-out wiring. The smell of ozone and melted plastic hung in the cold air. Tay worked beside him, his usual confident energy replaced by a grim, silent determination. They worked for hours, but every attempt to bring a system back online failed. It was like the ship's heart had stopped beating. It's not just broken, Tay finally said, his voice hollow. He held up a fused power coupling. It's dead. It's like something killed it. Jean didn't answer. He was looking at a diagnostic screen that had just flickered to life with the last of the backup power. The external sensors were mostly dead, but the navigational ones, the ones that looked for stars to fix their position, were working. They just couldn't find anything. No stars. No galaxies. No cosmic background radiation. It was as if they were in a bottle of the purest, deepest black ink ever made. They were nowhere. Not just lost, but removed. Back on the bridge, the reports from other sections were just as bleak. The hydroponics bay, Sumin's domain, had suffered a power surge. Many of the delicate growth lamps were shattered. Communications were completely down. They could not talk to each other inside the ship, let alone call for help to a home that was now impossibly far away. The hope that had launched them from Earth was gone, replaced by a quiet, crushing dread. They were a tiny, fragile bubble of life, adrift in an endless, starless sea. And their air was running out. Sumin woke up with a gasp. Her head throbbed. The world was dark and tilted. No, not tilted. She was weightless, held in her chair by her harness. The ark was silent. The usual gentle hum of the life support systems, the whisper of the water circulators, the soft glow of the full-spectrum sun lamps, all of it was gone. The only light came from the dim emergency strips on the floor, casting a red glow on the leaves of the plants around her. They looked wrong in the bloody light. Unnatural. Hannah. she whispered, the thought a stab of pure fear. She fumbled with her harness, her fingers clumsy. She had to get to the children's common area. She pushed off from her chair. Floating into the main aisle of the Arkansas, the air was cold and carried a strange, sharp smell, like ozone and something else, something metallic. She moved through the forest of plants, her hand brushing against leaves. They felt brittle. She reached the sealed door of the Arkansas. It was locked shut, its electronic mechanism dead. She pounded on the thick glass of the small viewport. Hello? Is anyone out there? Her voice was swallowed by the immense silence, and no one came. Trying to push down her panic, she turned back to her plants. This was her responsibility. This was the legacy of Earth. She found a handheld diagnostic scanner that had its own battery. She switched it on, its blue light a welcome relief from the oppressive red. She floated to the wheatgrass trays. The scanner beeped as she passed it over the young shoots. Her breath caught in her throat. The readings were abnormal. The chlorophyll was breaking down at an incredible rate. It wasn't just dying from lack of light and cold. It was being changed. She moved to a tray of legumes. There, on the stems and leaves, was a faint, shimmering dust. First, she thought it was frost. But it wasn't cold enough for frost. She looked closer. It was a growth. Tiny, intricate crystals, like microscopic snowflakes, were forming on the plants. They glinted in the light of her scanner. She reached out and touched one. It was not cold. It was slightly warm. And as she watched, it seemed to grow, spreading across the leaf like a slow-motion infection. This was new. This was not a result of the power failure. This was something that had come from outside. The cosmos had not just left them adrift. It had answered their intrusion with an intrusion of its own. Hannah was scared. The common room had been fun at first, floating around with the other kids. But then the big shake happened, and the lights went out and all the fun games on the screens went black. Now it was just red and dark and quiet. The nice woman, Dee, had gathered them all and helped them into the big, soft chairs, strapping them in. It's going to be okay, G.A.E. had said, but her voice was shaky. Just a little problem. Your moms and dads will fix it. But Appa hadn't come. Amma hadn't come. One of the younger children started to cry. The sound was small and scared in the big, dark room. Hannah didn't cry. She remembered what her Appa had said. You must be very brave. She looked out the big window. Before, it had shown a picture of stars. Now it was just black. Not the nice black of night with little lights. This was a big, empty, nothing black. It was like the world had been erased. She unclipped the small pouch she always carried on her belt. Inside was her treasure. A smooth, white stone she had found on a beach. A picture of her and her parents at a park. And her data pad, which was now just a dark slab. She held the stone tightly in her hand. It was from Earth. It was real. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the sun on her face. She tried to remember the sound of the birds in the morning outside their apartment. The memories already felt like a dream. J.E. was trying to get the room's computer to work, but it wasn't listening. Hannah heard her whisper a bad word that grown-ups weren't supposed to say. Hannah felt the fear growing inside her, a cold feeling in her tummy. She looked at the terrifying blackness outside the window. Then she looked down at the smooth, familiar stone in her hand. She held onto it tighter. It was the only thing that felt real. She was trying to be brave, but the black outside was so very big, and she was so very small. The cold was the new enemy. It seeped through the metal walls of the Odyssey, a deep, spaceborne chill that the failing life support could no longer fight. Gene pulled the collar of his jacket tighter, his breath misting in the red-lit gloom of the corridor. They had been drifting for 3 days. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a grinding, exhausting routine of survival. His world had shrunk to a few simple tasks. Conserve power. Fix what you can. Check on the crew. Check on his family. He floated now towards the children's common area, using the handholds on the walls to pull himself along. The ship was too quiet. The normal sounds of a living vessel were gone. leaving only the occasional creak of metal and the whisper of a struggling air vent. He found Hannah where he usually found her, strapped into a chair by the big window, looking out at the endless black. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked small and pale. "Appa," she said, her voice quiet. She didn't take her eyes off the void. Jean unclipped a nearby chair and pulled himself down next to her, fastening the harness. "Hannah, are you warm enough?" She nodded, but she was shivering. She finally turned to look at him. "There are no stars. Did they all go out?" Jean looked at the terrifying emptiness. How do you explain being lost between places to a child?
No.
They are still there. We just can't see them from here. It's like we're in a very long, dark tunnel. "Oh," she said. She was silent for a moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass. "GE was telling us a story. To be brave." "What story?" Jean asked, grateful for the distraction. "About the grandpa doves," Hannah said. Jean frowned. "He didn't know that one. You know," Hannah continued, seeing his confusion. "A long time ago, some fathers had to fly far, far away from their families to find work. They lived in other countries all alone. They were called dove fathers because doves can find their way home. They worked very hard and they were very lonely, but they did it so they could send money back, so their children could have a better home and go to a good school." She looked from the blackness outside back to her father. "That's us, right? We're like the dove family. We had to fly away so that everyone else could have a chance for a better home later." Jean felt a lump form in his throat. He looked at his daughter, her face so serious in the dim light. In her simple child's logic, she had found a meaning he had lost. They weren't just refugees. They were providers. Their loneliness and fear had a purpose. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "Yes, Hannah, that's exactly what we are." A new resolve settled over him. A dove father did not give up. He worked. He endured. For his family. Later, in the dim biolab attached to the Ark, Sumin floated beside Ji. The botanist's face was etched with tiredness, but her eyes were focused. She held her scanner over a leaf covered in the delicate, crystalline fungus. "It's not random," Sumin said, her voice low. "Look at the pattern." Ji peered at the screen. The scanner showed a complex, lattice-like structure growing through the plant's cells. "It's beautiful," she whispered, surprised by her own words. "It's invasive," Sumin corrected, but her tone was not angry. It was curious. "But it's not killing the host." "Not exactly. It's integrating. It's using the plant's biological processes, but it's also reinforcing the cell walls. See? The infected parts are actually more resistant to the cold." She moved the scanner. "And it's reacting." "To what?" "To everything." Sumin pointed to a data graph on the screen. "When the emergency lights flicker, the crystal's energy signature fluctuates. When we speak, there's a tiny corresponding vibration. It's like it's listening, learning. It's a mirror. It reflects the energy it receives." Just then, the ship gave a sudden, sharp shudder. A metallic groan echoed through the hull. It was the sound of stress, of the ship slowly giving up. In the children's common area. A panel near the ceiling sparked, and a small shower of sparks lit up the room for a second. The children gasped and cried out. Hannah flinched, clutching her blanket. The darkness felt heavier, the void outside more hungry. The story of the brave dove fathers felt very far away. The fear was back, cold and real on the bridge. An alarm beeped weakly. A final warning from a dying battery. Tay read the screen, his face grim. "Captain," he said, "the carbon dioxide scrubbers are failing. We have maybe 48 hours of breathable air left. After that." He didn't need to finish. The captain nodded slowly. She looked around the bridge, at the exhausted faces of her crew. "Options?" she asked, though they all knew the answer. Jean, who had just returned from seeing Hannah, straightened up. The story his daughter told him echoed in his mind. They worked very hard. They were very lonely, but they did it. "We've been trying to talk to the ship," Jean said. his voice cutting through the despair. Maybe we're trying to talk to the wrong thing. All eyes turned to him. Sumin, he said, looking at his wife over the comms link to the biolab. This crystal, this entity, it reacts to energy, to patterns. Sumin's face appeared on a flickering screen. Yes, it seems to. What if we stop trying to fight it? Jean proposed, the idea feeling both crazy and utterly necessary. What if we try to talk to it? Not with words, with what it understands, with energy, with math, with music.
Dai scoffed.
Talk to the mold that's eating our food supply? Jean, we need to burn it out, not have a conversation with it. And how do we do that, Tay? Jin's voice was sharp. With what power? With what fire? We have nothing left to fight with. All we have left is us, our story. Maybe that's the only thing it will understand. He looked from Tay's angry face to the captain's weary one. The Dove Father doesn't fight the new country. He learns its language. He does its work. He shows his value. That's how he survives. That's how he provides for his family. We have to show this presence, that we have value, that we are worth keeping alive. The bridge was silent. The idea was a thin thread of hope, stretching over a bottomless pit. But it was the only thread they had. The captain looked at Jean, then at Sumin's determined face on the screen. She took a slow, deep breath of the increasingly stale air. Do it, she said. The argument was quiet, but it filled the small biolab. Tay had followed Jean from the bridge, his face tight with frustration. You want to use the last of our power? To send pictures to the fungus. Tay's voice was a low hiss. He gestured at the dying plants around them. This is what's killing us, Jean. It's a disease. You don't talk to a disease. You cure it. You cut it out. Sumin floated between the two men, her body a barrier. It's not a disease, Tay. It's a life form. It doesn't think like we do. It doesn't want anything. It just is, and it responds. Responds how? Tay shot back. By growing faster? A great conversation. It responds to aggression with resistance. Sumin explained patiently, though her eyes were tired. When we tried to scrub it away, it released a chemical that made the plants brittle. When we applied an electrical charge to kill it, it redirected the energy and grew more. It mirrors the energy it's given. Jean placed a hand on a console. So we give it a different kind of energy. We have to try, Tay. The scrubbers are failing. This is the only path we haven't walked. Tay looked from Jin's determined face to Sumin's calm one. He shook his head in disgust. You're wasting our last hours. He pushed himself away from the door and disappeared down the dark corridor. The work began. It was a strange and desperate effort. They had so little power to spare. They decided to use the educational terminals in the children's common area. The screens were large, and the room had its own small, independent battery, one of the last with any charge. Ge and Sumin worked on the message. What do you say to an intelligence that might not be an intelligence? They started with the universal. They programmed a simple, pulsing light. A binary count. 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. The Fibonacci sequence. They showed the chemical structure of water, the double helix of DNA, the basic building blocks of life as they knew it. Hannah and the other children watched from their strapped-in chairs, silent and curious. Jean and a few other engineers rigged a connection. They would broadcast the energy patterns from the screens directly into the ARC's environment, hoping the crystalline network would sense it. They ran the first sequence. A soft, rhythmic pulse of light filled the screen, translating the Fibonacci numbers into a visual beat. In the ARC, Sumin and Ge watched the infected plants. Their scanners held ready. Nothing. The sequence ended. The screen went dark. The only sound was the labored breathing of the crew in the stale air. See! A voice muttered from the doorway. Tay had returned, watching from the shadows. Nothing. Sumin ignored him. She was staring at her scanner. Wait! She whispered. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer passed over the crystalline structures on a nearby fern. It was gone in an instant. It noticed. Jay said, her voice full of wonder. The energy signature flickered. It noticed. It wasn't much, but it was a response. It was the first word in a conversation they didn't understand. They tried the DNA sequence. A complex, twisting ladder of light. Again, a subtle reaction. A sympathetic vibration in the crystals. It was studying the pattern. But it wasn't enough. The air was getting worse. Heads were beginning to ache. The situation was still desperate. They were showing it math and science, but it was like reciting a dictionary to a stranger. There was no soul in it. They needed something more. They tried music. A simple, clean recording of a single violin playing a scale. The crystals glimmered, their structure shifting minutely, but it was a confused reaction. It was noise to them. They were running out of time and ideas. The children in the room were getting restless and scared. One of them started to cough, a dry, worrying sound in the thick air. Hannah watched it all. She saw her parents working so hard. She saw the adults looking sad and scared. She saw the big, black nothing outside the window. She felt the fear growing inside her again. A cold, tight feeling. She reached into her pouch and held her smooth, white stone. Then, she remembered something. Something that always made the fear go away. It was a song her Amma used to sing to her when she was very small and had a bad dream. A simple, silly song about a little rabbit eating a carrot. Amma had a soft, warm voice, and when she sang it, she would tickle Hannah's toes, and Hannah would laugh and laugh until the bad dream was forgotten. Without thinking, because she was a child and it felt like the right thing to do, Hannah started to sing. Her voice was small and a little shaky in the big, dark room. Little rabbit, crunch, crunch, crunch. Jean turned. Sumin looked up from her scanner. Everyone in the room looked at the small girl strapped in her chair, singing her little song to fight the darkness. On instinct, moved her hand over the console. The microphone was still active. She didn't plan it. She just did it. Hannah's voice, her simple, childish song, was broadcast through the speakers into the Arkansas. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The crystals on the plants didn't just shimmer, they glowed. A soft, warm, golden light pulsed from them, synchronizing with the rhythm of her song. The intricate lattices rearranged themselves, forming beautiful, swirling patterns that mirrored the rising and falling notes of her voice. It was no longer a confused vibration. It was a dance. The scanner in Sumin's hand beeped wildly. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide. It's not analyzing the sound waves, she breathed. It's feeling the emotion, the pattern of happiness, the lack of threat. It's reflecting the meaning. Hannah finished her song. The glow from the crystals slowly faded, but the new, beautiful patterns remained. The room was utterly silent. Then, from the doorway, Tay slowly floated forward. He wasn't scowling anymore. He was just staring at the plants, at the evidence of a connection he could never have believed. He looked at Jean, then at little Hannah. He gave a slow, stunned nod. They had found the key. It wasn't about complex information. It was about heart. It was about the one thing they had that was truly unique in the cosmos. Their humanity. Their joy, their love, their stories. The cosmos had answered their jump. And now, finally, they were starting to understand the language. A new kind of energy filled the ship. It was not the hum of reactors or the pulse of the jump drive. It was the energy of hope, fragile but bright. The discovery that the entity responded to emotion, to the pure, simple song of a child, changed everything. They were no longer fighting a hostile environment. They were building a bridge. The captain gave the order. They would use the very last of the ship's primary battery power. Not for weapons, not for a desperate escape, but for a presentation. They would show the entity who they were. The bridge became a command center for the most important transmission in human history. Jean and Tay worked side by side now, their earlier argument forgotten. They routed power to the main computer core. They linked every functional screen and speaker on the ship, focusing the output into the arc, where the crystalline network was most dense. What do we show it? He asked, her fingers hovering over the cultural database. The archive held the sum of human achievement, and all their failures. Not the wars, Sumin said firmly. Not the bombs or the hate. It mirrors what it sees. We must show it our best. We show it our heart. Jean agreed. They made their choices. It was not a logical argument, but a feeling they all shared. They began to compile a stream of data, a river of human feeling. The transmission began. First, they sent the visuals. The silent, majestic beauty of a snow-covered forest. The powerful, graceful leap of a whale breaking the ocean's surface. The intricate, impossible detail of a spider's web glistening with morning dew. They showed the vast, painted landscapes of deserts and mountains under a setting sun. The response in the ark was immediate. The crystals glowed with a soft, white light, their structures shifting to form complex, frozen patterns that looked like forests and waves and mountain ranges made of light. They were seeing the images and they were recreating them in their own way. Next, they sent art. A slow, panning shot of Michelangelo's David, every muscle and vein speaking of human potential. The swirling, emotional chaos of Van Gogh's Starry Night. The serene smile of the Buddha from a stone carving in Korea. A simple, powerful cave painting of a handprint, made 40,000 years ago. The crystals responded with bursts of color, deep blues and vibrant yellows and warm, earthy reds. They formed patterns that were not copies, but echoes, full of a strange and beautiful geometry that felt both alien and deeply familiar. Then, they sent music. Not just one kind, but the whole range of human soul. The deep, sorrowful beauty of a cello suite by Bach. The soaring, hopeful voice of a gospel choir. The complex, joyful rhythms of African drums. The quiet, lonely sound of a flute playing a folk song from a Korean mountain village. The ship itself seemed to breathe. The crystals pulsed and shimmered, their light dancing in time with the music. The very air in the ark felt different, warmer, thicker, charged with a sympathetic energy. They showed human connection. They found footage of a father lifting his laughing daughter into the air. A crowd of strangers working together to push a stranded bus out of the snow. An old couple, their faces lined with age, walking hand in hand through a park. A mother nursing her newborn child. This time, the entity's reaction was different. The light from the crystals did not flash or pulse. It glowed with a steady, warm, golden radiance. It was a light that felt like understanding, like comfort. For nearly an hour, the stream of human experience poured into the crystalline consciousness. They showed our curiosity with images of telescopes peering at galaxies and scientists studying tiny cells. They showed our creativity with scenes of dancers leaping and architects drawing plans for beautiful buildings. They were not hiding their flaws. They were simply emphasizing their best parts. Their capacity for love, for wonder, for creation. The final image was a simple one. It was a photo from Jean and Sumin's personal files. It showed the three of them on Hannah's 6th birthday. They were in their old apartment, surrounded by the dull gray light from the window, but they were laughing. Hannah was covered in cake frosting, and Jean and Sumin were hugging her. Their faces full of a love so strong it was almost painful to see. The transmission ended. The last of the primary battery power was gone. The screens on the bridge and all through the ship went black once more. The only light came from the emergency strips and, from the direction of the ark, a soft, golden glow that bled into the corridor. They waited in the silence. Had it been enough? Had their story been worth the telling? Then, a soft chime sounded on the bridge. It was a sound no one had heard in days. It was the sound of a computer system rebooting. Jean spun to his console. It was lighting up. Lines of text scrolled across the screen. Power. We have power. The reactor is initializing. How is that possible? Across the ship, lights flickered back on. The hum of the life support systems returned, a sweet, mechanical music to their ears. Fresh, cool air began to circulate, washing away the stale, suffocating atmosphere. But it wasn't just their own systems on the main viewer. An image resolved. It was not a star chart they recognized. It was a complex, three-dimensional map made of swirling lines of silver and gold against a black background. It was beautiful, At its center was a single, pulsing blue dot. Tay, working at the navigation station, gasped. I think this is us. The blue dot. His fingers flew over the console, comparing the alien map to their last known position. The lines, they are gravitational pathways, safe routes. This is a map of local space. But it's not just Proxima Centauri. His voice rose in awe. It shows dozens of systems, hundreds, with worlds that are green, habitable. The entity had not sent a message. It had given a gift, payment. In return for the beautiful, chaotic, emotional story of humanity, it had given them the universe. The cosmos had answered their cry for help. It had listened to their story, and it had found it valuable. And its answer was to open every door. The silence on the bridge was not the silence of despair. It was the silence of awe. The soft, golden light from the arc painted their faces, and the steady hum of the ship's systems was a gentle song of life returned. They were no longer a dying ship in a dead space. They were a living vessel, cradled in the palm of something vast and kind. Jin's console was alive with data. The map the entity had given them was not just an image. It was a key. It integrated with their navigation computer, its pathways glowing with a soft, internal light. The jump drive, Tay said, his voice full of wonder. He looked at the diagnostics. The damage is still there, but the entity's energy, it's showing us how to route around it. It's like it's holding the broken pieces together with light. We can jump. We can jump safely. The captain stood up, her posture straight for the first time in days. Set a course, she said, her voice clear and strong. For the nearest green world on that map. The order was given. There was no debate. The hope for a single new world was gone, replaced by the certainty of many. They were no longer refugees on a desperate pilgrimage. They were pioneers. Throughout the ship, the change was felt. The lights were bright. The air was clean and sweet. Crew members who had moved like ghosts through the dark corridors now smiled, their steps quick and purposeful. The fear was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, powerful excitement in the children's common area. The main lights were on. The big window was no longer a terrifying view into nothing. It was a promise. A had gathered the children and was telling them a new story about the many new homes they would get to choose from. Hannah listened, but her attention was on the small, clear crystal she held in her hand. It was warm to the touch and pulsed with a soft, gentle light, like a tiny, sleeping star. It was a gift. The entity had left it for her on the arm of her chair. A final, personal goodbye in the arc. The crystalline structures were receding. They were not dying or withdrawing in anger. They were simply finished. Their work was done. As they faded, they left the plants healthier and stronger than before, as if thanking them for their role. Sumin floated among them, her scanner in her hand. She felt no sadness, only a deep and profound gratitude. They had met the unknown, and the unknown had become a friend. On the bridge, Jean stood with Sumin and Hannah. They had been called there for the jump. This time it was different. There was no violent shaking, no terrifying roar. The entity's map stabilized space around them, creating a smooth pathway through the void. Jump drive is ready, Tay reported, his voice calm and confident. Jean looked at the captain. She nodded. Engage. Jean pressed the command. The purple light of the jump drive ignited, but this time it was soft, almost gentle. It mixed with the golden energy of the entity's pathways. The ship moved forward. The starless black outside the viewer swirled and then melted away, replaced by the glorious, diamond-dusted tapestry of a new starfield. At the center of the viewer was a single, beautiful star, glowing a warm orange. And next to it, highlighted by the navigation computer, was a world. A marble of blue and green and white. A cheer erupted across the bridge. It was not a loud, wild cheer, but a deep, relieved sound. People hugged. Some cried. They were safe. But the view on the screen changed. The image of the new world shrank, moving to a corner. The main display now showed the entity's map in all its glory. 1,000 stars glowed, and next to hundreds of them, small symbols pulsed, worlds that could be homes. Jean looked from the incredible map to his wife and daughter. Sumin's hand was in her grip firm. Hannah was looking at the new world with wide, excited eyes, her crystal held tightly in her fist. He understood then. They were not just safe. They were transformed. The Odyssey was no longer a lifeboat. It was an ambassador's ship. They were carrying the most valuable cargo in the universe, a treasure that the cosmos itself had found precious. They were carrying their story. Humanity had jumped into the dark, a desperate act of a tired species. And the cosmos, in its own silent, magnificent way, had listened to their song, admired their art, and felt their love. And it had answered by giving them not just a new home, but a new purpose. They were the proof that in the great, cold darkness of space, a warm heart was the most powerful engine of all. Jean put his arm around Sumin and pulled Hannah close. They looked at the map of 1,000 possibilities, a future wider and brighter than they had ever dared to dream. The Dove family had arrived, and they had brought with them the one thing the universe truly seemed to value: a good story.